Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about object-oriented in Python programming and talk about inheritance in object-oriented programming and how you can also create your own class methods and class variables in Python programming. In this, I will try to explain with a simple example that makes it easier to understand this concept. And what is object-oriented programming? The simplest way to explain this is that object-oriented programming is a way that allows us to bundle and transfer the properties and behaviors of an object from one form to another. So, if we think of an object as a class of animals, so let's say this is a animals. So you would agree with me that animals have like attributes and behaviors that allows us to call it animals. But under animals, there are different types of animals, right? So we can say another class of animals is dogs. So we call this dogs. What I'm trying to show you here is that dogs is an animal that has same attributes, some attributes and behaviors in the class of an animal. But also dogs have its own attributes and behaviors. So how does this relate to object-oriented programming? So it's possible for us to see this as to see animals here as an object. And so we define an object like this and say it is object of animals, and animals in this case as attributes and behaviors. Then we can use this same attributes, same definition of animal to create a new class of animals, in this case, which is dogs. So we don't have to create a new object, so to say, from scratch. We just have to reuse some attributes in animals here and reuse the same attributes also in behaviors. And we can also create our own attributes for animals, for dogs, and for dogs, which are necessarily not part of the parent object, which is animals. And to go further, we can create a new object of dogs, which is particular type of dog in this case. So we can have a new object of dog that shares attributes of dogs and also inherits. I'm using the word inherit here now because the original attributes have been defined in animals, but we can transfer the same attributes to dogs and then to this new class of dogs. Let's call them bulldogs. And you would agree with me that bulldogs also, they have their own attributes, even though they inherit from animals, from dogs. But there are characteristics of bulldogs that make it separate or different from other kinds of animals. So this is the idea of object-oriented programming. Basically, in all kinds of programming languages that allows you to do object-oriented programming, there are many cases where you would have to define attributes of an object, but you would also need to inherit or take attributes of another object that has already been defined. And this is how object-oriented programming helps us to reuse codes and to extend code into a larger class. So just because I want to create a bulldog class, I don't need to specify the attributes that are already been specified in animals and dogs. I just need to reuse them, then add the attributes that belong to bulldogs. So I'm going to explain this in code so you can kind of get the relationship between the code and the explanation. So in this case, I have an empty workspace, and you already know I can open a terminal by doing this, and I'm using Anaconda environment, so I'll activate my Anaconda environment. So the Anaconda environment is activated. Now, First, I want to show you how to do this in the Python interactive shell, because this helps us to be able to test our code in many ways. So I've said this before, you should probably check my previous videos to know how to do this. So I can create a class by saying, oh, first I need to start Python. So if I do Python, then now I'm in the interactive shell. So I can say class animal. So there's a column right there. Then create some attributes. So some attribute of animal is that they have blood. So I'll say has blood, true. Then can move. Yeah, animals can move. That is also true. And thirdly, I'll just say reproduce sexually. Then that is also true. So now I have created a class of animals. So you can see if I say animal, you can see that it says class main animal. So there is something called an instance of a class. So the instance of a class is a copy of that class with actual values. So now what we have created is just like a definition of a class. How is the class going to be like? What are the attributes of the class? So in this case, we have some attributes: has blood, can move, can reproduce sexually. So if I want to create an instance of a class, I can just say an animal equals to animal, like that. So that is just an instance of a class. So if I want to check the attributes of this animal class, I can say animal dot has blood. Yeah, so it tells me true. I can do the same thing for an animal dot can move. All right, you can see it tells me true. So this is in the Python interactive shell. I would like to do this in my code also. So I would let me just try to copy this over into my code. I remove this part, right, and save it. So I'm gonna save it as class op the py. All right, so now I have a Python script that has definition of animals. However, I still want to run this in the Python interactive shell. So how do I do this? I say Python class op py. So what happens here is that instead of me to type this again into the Python interactive shell, I just load the class into the Python interactive shell. Then I can now use the class. So just like before, let me say new animal equals animal. You can see, so new animal is defined. Then I can check the attribute of new animal dot can move, and that is true. So now we've created a very simple animal class. And what we have done here is that we have made these attributes default attributes, so you don't have to define it. So once you create a class, these attributes are already created. You can also define a class that allows the user to specify the value in the attributes of that class. So we're going to create a new type of class that allows the user to specify. So like I said before, that there is an inheritance. So Python has inbuilt object that every other class can actually inherit from. So we are going to like reference, like inherit that object. So object, like I've said this before, object is one of those keywords that you cannot use as a variable in Python because of this purpose. So now we can define a class function. So now I want to define a class function that is that allows the user to give the class an attribute when it's created. So I'm going to give it a class function that receives the name of the particular animal. So how do you do this? You already know how to create a function. So I'll say def. So this is a class function that allows us to give attributes to the class when it is created. So we say self, and the attribute that we want to give. So in this case, I want to give a name to the animal. So in order to do to always give an attribute while you create the class, you always have to specify this init function. It basically means initialize the attributes of the animal. So I'm going to say self.name equals to name. So what does self mean here? With self here, I'm referring to the class inside itself. So self here means animal, but inside its own self, because it is possible for me to refer to it another class from inside this animal class. So instead of, confusing this with each other, I will say that self, which means the animal, the self, the animal class itself inside itself. So let's save this and exit. Then I can run this again. Now let us create a new animal, another animal. Okay, equal to animal. In this case, if I do it like before, it's going to give me an error because now I have to specify a name. So you can see this type error init function is missing required position argument, which is name. So what I have to do now is define a name for the animal. So I'm going to call it earth animal. Well, there could be some animal in all the dimensions, so this is an animal on earth. So now it goes. So what if I want to check the attribute of this animal? I'll say another animal dot name. So this is the name of the animal. You can see. I realize I have to make this bolder, so let's make it bigger. Okay, that should be good. Now that we have done that, now we have to create let's create a class that inherits from this animal class. So let's create a dog class like I showed you here before, a dog class that inherits from the animal class. So how do we do that? We're going to say that class dog. Then, like here we inherited from the inbuilt base class. This is what we call it, base class, which is inbuilt in Python. Now we're going to do this. Instead of using object, we're going to say animal, right? And what attributes do we want to give the dog class? We want to say maybe the dog has a name, or it has an age, or has a color, or something like that. So I'm going to define again the initialization, age and color. Let's use the American spelling here. So the same thing that I did above here, name equals to name, then self, that is the dog's age equals to the age that I've been given to it, and this dog's color is equal to the color that is used to initialize it. So let's save this and let's check this in our Python interactive environment. Exit. So we run this again. Now we have a class in the class animal, we have class dog. So let me create a class dog. So let's call this dog a dog. Let's just call it a dog. Maybe we can give it a better name later, but for now we can say dog. Then we have to specify the name. Let's call it Billy. The age, let's say it's 2 years old, and the color, let's call it white, right? Okay, what is, I think there's a problem here, so I have to correct. The init function is not correct. So let's run this again. Now it goes through. So let's check the attributes of this dog. So we say a dog dot name gives us the name. And to show you the inheritance that I talked about earlier, a dog, even though we did not specify this here in the dog class, we can say a dog dot has blood, and it says it's true because this attribute is inherited from the animal class, you see. So let us create another class to inherit from dogs, but in this case let's personalize the class. This is just a generic dog, right? So let's personalize the class and call it maybe bulldogs. Bulldog. It's going to inherit from dog class, and we're going to define a new function. Now I'm creating a class method that tells us maybe that has some attributes. So in this case, this bulldog can introduce itself, or it can maybe talk, or maybe it can do some other things that other dogs cannot do. So I'm going to create a function that is called introduce, and the function is not going to take any argument, but the function is going to tell us the name of the dog. So we're going to say print, hi, my name is. Now self.name. Even though we did not define this here in this particular class, it inherits this name from the previous class. So we're going to say self.name that nice to meet you. So here we've created a new class. Now it's kind of counterintuitive because we are creating all these classes in the same Python file, but in real world usage, you would probably have these other classes created somewhere else, and you want to use them again in your own Python script. So you don't have to rewrite that code from the other place that you're importing the class from. So I'm going to actually demonstrate that later, but let's see how this goes. So let's check our bulldog class and Python class up. So just check this, a dog. Let's call this dog, yeah, Billy. Let's just say Billy equal to bulldog. Now I wanted to say Billy, but that's all right. So we can ask Billy to introduce itself. So I can say introduce. Hi, my name is Billy. Nice to meet you. So you can see, but if I use the same function on, say, an instance that I created using the dog family or using the dog class, you would not see this attribute because it has not been created in that attribute. So one more thing I just want to add here is using multiple files to do this kind of thing. So I'm going to move this definitions into a different file. All right. So I'm gonna, let's create a new file, place it here, and save it as animal class.py. So how do I use this in this file? So you might have seen this before, but to use a library or to use a package or to use a class that has been defined somewhere else, you have to say import. For example, in the case of NumPy, probably you've not seen this before, I can say just say import NumPy. This is a package that is already on my system. But in this case, I'll say from animal class import dog. So now I can use dog here in my own script, and it gives me the same output. So let's do that again. Now I can run that again. Let's say now let me correct this. Then I'll say Billy.introduce. Yeah, so it gives me the same output, but now my code is cleaner because I only need to work on this. That has already been defined, so I just need to work on this code here. Even though this is not perfect, I'm going to show you how to make this better, because there are some issues that could come up when you do this kind of definition. But this works. So there it is for object-oriented programming in Python programming. It is not the full deep dive, but I feel that this should give you the idea of object-oriented programming, and you can actually use this knowledge to understand much more deeper and deeper concepts in object-oriented programming in Python programming. Okay, till the next time, have a good one.